All right. Happy to call to order the 108th public meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, again at the BCEC on February 20th. And we will start out with agenda item number 2, the approval of minutes. But I think we do not have any minutes, right?
That's right, so it's a very quick item.
Okay, good. We'll move right on to item number 3. This is going to be a short day. And we will go to Rick J., our Executive Director.
Thank you, Chairman Crosby and fellow commissioners, and good morning.
Morning. Morning. Morning.
I do have a few general update items that I'd like to share with the commissioners. We are in final preparations to begin licensing. At this point, we've developed 10 applications and are in the process of final proof to match the forms to the regulations. We're setting up each applicant as a fillable PDF that will be available online. We're developing instructions for each form. We have a checklist for each type of license to guide the completeness review. We're completing the acquisition of an automated fingerprint equipment to help process our fingerprints and our take fingerprints. We're setting up the related revenue accounts, preparing to accept credit cards and wire transfers and complete check verifications online, developing an interim process for applications received prior to the completion of our new license management system. So our licensing and our accounting and financial crew have been very busy setting up the licensing process and getting ready to go following the Commission's award of the license. Also, we are in the process, and I say this we because a lot of it's Commissioner McHugh as well, final preparations for our March 11th Internet Gaming Forum at the Convention Center to begin at 8:30 and end at approximately switch to military time, to 4:30. And at this point, we've confirmed 15 speakers. So we're confident of our agenda, and we believe it'll be very interesting to everybody. For the technology side, we've completed installation of our hardware at 1 Summer Street to host our data for the document and licensing management system. And so as we move forward, you'll hear the term abbreviation LMS quite frequently. So if somebody fails to explain it, that is a licensing management system. And of course, we're waiting on 1 Summer for connectivity and configuration that is in process. Our LMS project development is continuing. We've interviewed and selected a desktop support candidate to help support our terminals in the office. And we're in process of...
We're about to hire the person?
Yes, we are. We have selected, so they're in background phase and acceptance phase at this point. That should help as well and make sure that we can get around and deal with any questions we have in the technical side in the office. We are also working to improve the wireless service at our central office and an additional upgrade that should speed our system as well. I think we're going to double the speed of the system, so that'll be helpful, particularly as we try to live stream events. We are also in the process, our technology crew is in the process of acquiring tablets for the commissioners and working to actually slowly convert everybody from the manual notebooks to the electronic version.
Wait a minute. Nobody talked to me about this.
I still have the statute here with me.
I want to be like Jim.
I know,
yes.
We do have a lucky volunteer to experiment with how that might work, but we think in the end, the hard copy will still be available, but we're convinced in the end we'll convince everybody to the benefits of moving to the tablet
Extensive
system.
tutorials and hand-holding and...
I'm sure you how to get sports events and things.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
There's no movie watching while you're at commission meetings, those kind of things. And we're, of course, as the commissioners are well aware of, we're completing final preparations for the report and issuance for the Category 2 licenses, process to begin on Tuesday, February 25th.
Other hires, where you've got a bunch of other relatively senior positions kind of in the pipeline, what's the status of
We
those?
are. I think we're talking about a total of about 10 positions. We're probably the most senior are 2 assistant directors for our IAB.
Right.
And we're in the process. We've got final candidates for both of those.
You've got
positions.
final candidates for
Yes.
those?
Yes.
Good.
We're stronger on the candidates for our gaming agent. We have a bigger variety, less of a variety for our financial assistant director. So we'll see how those go.
Good.
Now, if I could get the commission to refer to item 3B, titled Licensing Fee Distribution Plan. We have been discussing assessments, a funding plan, and distribution of license fee payments from, when I was looking back, from the successful slots and casino applications, I believe, since late last year. And we have continued to review comments received and the options available to the commission. We had been focusing on stabilization funds, and as a result of further review of those proposals and that discussion, we've identified a proposed plan that we believe fills the commission's funding needs while minimizing any impact to the 9 funds expecting to receive dollars from licensing fees. As you all know, Derek Lennon, our CFAO here, has included a memorandum describing the proposed approach and will review it with the commission. So with that, I will turn it over to Derek. Derek, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm not going to bore you by reading all 6 pages of the memo, so I'll try and just hit on the highlights. The purpose of the memo is twofold. It's first to lay out the authority included in both the Expanded Gaming Act as well as Chapter 23K, our enabling legislation.
Derek, excuse me, because I just want to make one thing. I think that this will be clear, but the issue is that we have been operating on a loan from the Rainy Day Fund, which the legislature included for $15 million, which was at that stage of the game the legislature's educated guess as to how much money would be required for us to use for operating expenses before we begin to assess our operating expenses on our bidders.
Correct.
That $15 million is about to run out, and so we're talking here about how we bridge the period between the use of the Rainy Day Fund loan and our ability to assess our operating expenses on our licensees.
Correct.
So we're talking now about a mechanism for bridging that gap.
So on January 23rd, I reported that we had about a $5 million
Right.
gap, anywhere between $4.25 million to $5 million gap.
Right.
For our funds, for our expenses in FY14 from what the anticipated revenues will be bringing in. So what we're looking at is an option of using some licensing fees to bridge that gap, possibly use them into FY15, even though our intention is to have the cost assessment up and running by that time period, which I think is the next item on the agenda.
Right.
And then repay the licensing fees to what will eventually be the Community Mitigation Fund, the fund that we are in control of and we don't see a need.
Right. I just
for
wanted
those
to remind
dollars
everybody of
until-
anybody that was watching of the context of what's going on here.
Okay.
Great.
So the purpose of the memo is twofold. One, it's to lay out the authority included in the Expanded Gaming Act as well as Chapter 23K, our enabling legislation to retain licensing fees. And the second is to update, which is you're bringing us back into the ballgame theory of the plan that we presented on the 23rd of how we will use licensing fees to fund our operations. And the update is to drop it from 20 million down to 17.5 million so that the only fund that would be impacted is the Community Mitigation Fund, which we are the trustee of, and we don't see a need to use any of those funds until casinos are fully up and operational. And we'd pay back that fund within an 18-month period prior to the licensing fund expiring.
Right.
So Chapter 194 of the Act of 2011 is the Expanded Gaming Act. Section 93 of that act creates a gaming licensing fund and authorizes the fund to receive all Category 1 or Category 2 licensing fees. The fund is used as a clearinghouse to distribute those dollars based on a percentage share to 9 separate and distinct funds, with a 10th transfer coming to the stabilization fund to repay the initial $20 million, $15 million to the Gaming Commission, and $5 million to the Governor's Office to stand up expanded gaming in Massachusetts. The word "or" is used in Section 93, which is, "or" is used to link 2 or more alternatives. It's never used as an "and" clause. So the main piece that I want to bring across, and that's on the bottom of page 1 of your memo, it's highlighted, that it gives the commission the discretion in which one of the fees to deposit into the licensing fund, either Category 1 or Category 2. So either the $170 million we're projecting for this year, or the $25 million for the Category 2. On top of that, Chapter 23K, Section 57A creates a gaming control fund. The gaming control fund is where we fund our operational costs from. The number of sources of dollars, of types of funds that can go into there appropriations from the legislature, our cost assessments. And then there's a rather broad catch-all clause that's highlighted in the bottom of your second page of the memo, and such additional funds as are subject to the direction and control of the commission. This authority allows us to deposit any funds that don't have a predetermined destination into that fund. And then Section 4 of Mass General Law, Chapter 23K, grants the commission all powers necessary or convenient to carry out and effectuate its purposes. The extraordinarily broad power of Section 4 combined with Section 57 having the ability to take any funds that don't have a predetermined place, as well as Section 93, which gives us an or clause, basically is the justification we've come up to for the reason is how we can deposit some licensing fees into our gaming control fund and use for operations. So I'll take a pause there if anyone wants to ask questions on that part, and because then I'll go into the plan as to how we'll utilize licensing fees.
I'll be happy just to emphasize the context here, which is very important. The discretion that we have in this section of depositing funds either from Category 1 or Category 2 is crucial to our ability to fund the gap that we are projecting for this year, but also, very importantly, to not rely on only our licensees at the time, which are projected to be only the Category 2 licensee, which if we didn't have the alternative to temporarily take use some of those licensing funds, we would have no other choice but to rely on our only licensee at the time, which would be a disproportionate reliance on to cover costs on the one licensee that would be available at the time. Further, this is also constrained, or the context here is that we cannot carry over a deficit from one fiscal year to the next, which goes back to the original point of either having to rely only on one licensee or temporarily use these monies.
Yeah, that was, I think, the plan that I presented to you in November.
Yes.
That had resounding comments coming back saying we don't like that plan from the public. So we've looked at this in other manners. That was the one where we're going to assess our full difference on the Category 2 and then make it up afterwards through a cost assessment process.
That's right.
So we have looked at this item inside and out, I think, from every different angle possible.
That's right.
Well, I think this is an entirely thoughtful reading of the statute, but I in saying that, don't rely on any one clause. It seems to me that the three pieces that are put together, and particularly our broad discretion under Section 4 of the statute, when combined with the other features you described, give us the power to do this. There's a number of ways you can read this, but I think this is a fair and appropriate reading of the statute, and the one-time startup costs that we incurred are not going to recur. We'll be able to pay this back before we need it. It seems to me that this is an appropriate way to proceed. But I rely on all three prongs of your stool, legs of your stool.
So the next section of the memo deals with the current plan for distribution of licensing fees, and we're going to go to some of the same sections that I referenced before. Section 93A of the Expanded Gaming Act lists 9 separate and distinct funds, as well as a separate percentage share that they should receive from Category 1 or 2 licensing fees. Section 93B of the same act requires that of those 9 funds, 2, the Transportation Infrastructure and Development Fund, administered by MassDOT, and the Community Mitigation Fund, administered by the Commission, cannot receive their proportional share of the funds until the stabilization fund is first repaid $20 million. Section 94C of the Act requires the Commission to execute the transfer to the stabilization fund once the Commission has received sufficient licensing funds. There's nothing in there that says first transfer, it just says sufficient. So based on those two parts of Section 93 as well as Section 94, the only timing requirements that the Commission has for when they have to pay back, distribute money to each fund, is that the two funds, the Community Mitigation Fund, the Transportation Infrastructure Development Fund, cannot receive their share until the stabilization fund is paid back first. So that's the only timing requirements. So the plan that we had, that I presented on the 23rd, had us giving, taking $20 million, then holding the 7 funds harmless from what, and let me go backwards a little bit. So what we're trying to get to, the state budget was built assuming $175 million in licensing fees would be available to be spread out to these different funds. We're trying to hold all of those funds that are budgeted harmless through timing of our placement.
By hold harmless, you mean actually distribute the funds to them?
Actually distribute the funds to them, so that there isn't a gap
Right.
in the state's budget. So by using timing mechanisms, I think we can get to that with only hurting one fund. The plan I brought to you on the 23rd hurt 2 funds, because what I was going to do was take $20 million off the top to fund the Gaming Commission, then transfer $175 million to the licensing fund, which would give the top 7 funds their 74.5% share of it, or 75.5% share of those funds, and then take $20 million, transfer to the stabilization fund, which would leave the Community Mitigation Fund, the Transportation Infrastructure Development Fund short about 47% of the $42 million they were supposed to get, and distribute those equally. Under the revised plan, which is laid out in a chart format on the last page, what I'm proposing is to bring in the 195 in licensing fees, transfer $17.5 million to the Gaming Control Fund, transfer 175 over to the licensing fund, leaving 2.5 in our bank account of where the money came in. It would give the full $132 million to the budgeted funds that the budget was built on. And then I would drop $20 million over the stabilization fund, take the other 2.5 that was still sitting in our bank account, put it back into the licensing fund, and then I would transfer the full $25 million that the Transportation Infrastructure Development Fund is expecting from these fees. And the only fund that wouldn't get paid is the Community Mitigation Fund, which we're the trustee of, and we don't see a need for at least a year until casinos are fully operational and any unanticipated consequences of gaming the impacts of gaming on the local infrastructure take place. Now, we would have built into our cost assessment a payback process to the Community Mitigation Fund, and any monies that we didn't spend in FY14 or the beginning of FY15, depending when our cost assessment regulation comes into place, we'd transfer immediately into the Community Mitigation Fund. So I see this really as a very short-term plan, just to fill that gap of FY14 until we can get our cost assessments up and running and get our payback mechanism in place.
So this is basically, comes down to a short-term borrowing plan from a fund over which we have control, and the money in which would simply sit there for a year and a half doing nothing.
Doing nothing.
Until the casinos were up and running, and potentially.
At the earliest, yeah.
At the earliest, and potentially, some communities would ask us for disbursements from the fund, and by the time they ask us, the fund will be fully funded and ready to go.
Fully funded, and it'll have gaming revenue coming into it too.
Right.
So, thank you for summarizing that in a much more succinct way.
No, your description was thoughtful. I just sometimes say things out loud to make sure I understand them.
Well, no, you said that was good, that was helpful. I mean, 'cause nobody watching is going to follow that, but your synthesis helps.
The only thing, now this memo is thoughtful and thorough as well. The only question I had as to the memo on page, the chart on page 6, is how we get to 177.5 as opposed to 175 at the bottom line.
The 177.5 is because we transferred out 17.5 million versus 20 million to the Game and Control Fund. So if you look, there's still 2 at the top.
Yeah.
We're transferring 175 million to the licensing fund, which leaves 2.5 million sitting in licensing fees. So I
Yeah.
distribute the 175, and then if you look down in the middle, remaining move balance of licensing fees to licensing fund, there's another $2.5 million transfer there.
Yeah, no, I see that. I just I found it a little hard to follow, but
Yeah, this is all the time.
It just seemed to me we were, if that is meant to be a time sequence.
That's a
and
time
you have to
sequence.
factor in a time, and we're not somehow metaphysically getting another 2.5 million.
No, it's just
a
timing.
timing.
Because you've got the 17.5 plus the 177.5
Right.
adds up to the 195.
So that's
And this is where I said we can, through timing,
Right.
we can make this
Right.
work.
Right, I understand. But the reader of this then, like me, has to understand that the 177.5 is to account for a time spread. And
Correct.
it's not additional monies.
No
over,
additional monies.
the monies that we are getting from the licensees. Okay.
When Derek can figure out how to metaphysically get us $2.5 million.
Well, I was hoping.
We'll all be
This is why, one of the reasons we got it. So
Right.
If I may, I think this is a very solid plan, and I think we should proceed with this. I would just also put other context into this, because initially I was of the opinion that we should take a plain reading of the legislation and try to comply with as many of the specific sections that that coalesce around all of these around this plan. You mentioned them in your introduction. There's, as Commissioner McHugh pointed out, there are a lot of sections here that converge, and by doing this, I believe we do the least harm to what's already been accounted for over at the state level, and planned for this fiscal year. So I think it's really solid. I might also add that it's evident through my discussions with you that you've looked at it every possible way, which I think it's good to mention for the record. I've thought about what would happen if we short one fund, the rainy day fund, and there's this other restriction relative to deposit into the community mitigation fund as well as the transportation and infrastructure fund, for which projects may have already been committed over at the Commonwealth. So I'm happy to endorse this, and I think there's been a lot of thought that has been put into analyzing every possible option that we had at our disposal. So thank you for this.
Yeah, I agree with that. Do we need a vote on this, or can we?
We did not, we didn't note that on the agenda, but I do believe it's appropriate that we have a note. We had a lot of discussion. We've now got a plan here that essentially provides for the distribution of all the funds, but mitigation, which is under our control, and that will be repaid back by the time the licensing fund expires in December.
So you said, is that yes?
Yes.
Okay. Treasurer, do you want to?
Sure, and I was going to also mention that the one thing but you've highlighted here, that we may not technically be compliant with is the distribution on a pro rata basis to the second set of funds. But as I said before, I think that everything else trumps that one requirement.
Yeah, so they
And
will
ulti-
receive their full proportional share. It's just whether we time those at the exact same time.
Right.
But the fund will receive its full proportional share, and that's our intention to always pay it back, and we'll pay it back before the licensing fund expires, and we can bring those into the cost assessment process, into the fees. I mean, the 25 and 85 are just a bare minimum fee, so you can always, we can build that in so that, and we've looked at it to make sure it complies with the letter of the law.
Precisely. No, thank you. Thank you for that. Sure. So on that note, I would move that the commission endorse and approve the plan as presented by staff relative to a temporary use of the licensing fees to fund the commission with an understanding of repayment as originally intended and described in this memo as soon as possible.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
work.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a lot that's gone into this, and I appreciate it for all of you. Thank you. I'm just gonna get some more coffee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I'll just move on to the item 3C. And if I can get you to take a look at the documents behind item 3C, cost assessment regulation, 205 CMR 125, licensing fee and assessment, and then also 11806, RFA 2 license determinations. What I'll try to do this morning here is to review the issue and then ask Catherine and Derek and Todd to chime in as we need to answer questions and provide any additional explanation. At our last regular meeting, the Commission discussed, identified changes, and approved an emergency regulation to amend 121 a fee assessment into 121 a fee assessment and budget process. We are bringing 121 back at this point to clarify changes added by the Commission during that discussion. If I might point you to the what you have in your packet, there's a red line version, which is the changes, but the highlighted yellow are the changes that the Commission made during session. We want to make sure that this reflects the discussion, and just let me direct them to you real quick. We're bringing 121 back to clarify those changes by the Commission. The Commission, those changes are noted in yellow highlight. In 121.02, Section 1, we added precondition, and then also added before the award is made and the license issued. Paragraph 3, we added except in the case of an assessment for the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2014. And we added pro rata basis commencing with the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2014. And then we added will make such assessment. In summary, these changes clarify any installment payments of license fees must be made prior to award of a license, and they add the ability to assess costs in the last quarter of 2014 on a pro rata basis, and then assess costs for each fiscal year. So as we move forward in the process of making those changes to 121, Commissioner McHugh noted that we also needed an emergency amendment to 11806 to allow the option of the installment payments. I can refer, it should be the last item that you have in that packet. What this 118 provides, and is consistent with the statute, it provides 3 ways for the Commission to take action on an application. Essentially, that's to grant, deny, or extend the timeline. In order to use the installment authority that the Commission inserted in the cost assessment regulation in 121, we thought it made sense to provide a 4th option to allow for a decision that provides for an award on a future effective date, which should allow for the installment payments if the Commission determines that's appropriate. And that language is added as a D, and in red, is issue a decision on the application for a gaming license that provides that a license shall be awarded effective as of a date to be determined by the commission. As the commission is preparing to make a licensing decision around the end of February, remaining time does not allow for the usual regulation development and approval process, and our request is that both amendments be enacted as emergency regulations. And as I understand the process, the regulations will be effective for, the emergency regulations will be effective for 90 days, and 90 days from when we provide notice to the Secretary of State, and we will also move forward with the formal adoption process. So if Catherine or Derek have anything to add, or the Commission have any questions from that point?
I do have a question. 12102, subsection 3. Presupposes that everybody, that 2 category 1s and 1 category 2 would be awarded by the end of the fiscal year. Or rather, or put another way, we would start fiscal year 15 on May 30th, and ideally assess as many applicants as we can for fiscal year 15, which, if everything goes well, may still happen, but it may not. So I was wondering if we need to write that the exception for the 4th quarter could also extend, if necessary, to fiscal year 15.
So that we could make an assessment, or a revised set of assessments sometime during FY15 rather than just at the beginning of FY15.
Yes, precisely.
Is that not available at this point?
Unless there's another section where we can revise the assessments during the fiscal year 15.
There is that ability.
There is, I thought, because
We monitor the budget quarterly.
right.
That's in section 12404. And then paragraph 3 allows, if any time during the fiscal year the commission determines actual costs will exceed projected cost per record or so forth, the commission will revise the annual assessment. So it does give us the authority to revise that during 2015.
But Commissioner Zuniga's point's a little different.
Yes.
There is no, the costs stay the same, but the potential payers increase.
That's right.
What do we do then?
Right. If we were to assume the worst, that we only issue 1 license in this fiscal year, for the sake of argument, or actually, that we only issue 1 license before May 30th, right? The way this reads, it would have us assess fiscal year 15 only to the 1 licensee, which was a lot of what we were trying to avoid from our prior discussion. So in my view and recommendation, the exception that we have in this paragraph that only applies to the last quarter of fiscal year 14 may need to be extended to include fiscal year 15.
But I think we can add some language to this section to clarify that. One of the other ways to address it is through the reconciliation at the end, where if we had assessed only 1 applicant during 15, when we get to the middle or to the end of 15, we would have to reconcile back to the other applicants that came on board during the year. I think we have the ability to do that, but I do agree with you that it's not as clear in paragraph 121.02.3, the situation that you proposed. So we could add some language to 3 to allow for the fact that not all the applicants come online before the beginning of FY15. I think that's the issue that you're pointing out. So
I agree with that. And I think we're looking to create as much flexibility, and B, as much clarity in that flexibility as possible. So I think that's right. We also have just got through setting up a situation where if that happened, we could use some of the license fees for a period of time if we wanted to.
Right.
But nevertheless, I think your clarification is important.
Well, it's a simple clarification.
Yeah.
Except in case of an assessment for the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2014 and for fiscal year 2015.
Yes.
Yeah.
That does it.
Yeah, I think that works.
And do that in 2 places.
That's right.
That's what we need to do.
So add 2015 at the end of the first sentence,
Yes.
and you said 2 places.
Well,
First
the end-
clause.
At the end of the first clause.
There.
At the end of the first highlighted yellow.
Right.
And then make some similar reference in the penultimate sentence
The next to
of
last.
that paragraph.
The next to
The next
last.
to last, yes, sorry. That really does, these changes, all of them together, really do give us the flexibility we need to meet almost any contingency imaginable, although
Who knows?
who knows? I think it's important to note that insofar as the clarification of, the addition of 11806, .06 is concerned, the statute, the language of which is really in the first sentence of that, the first 2 sentences,
Which
doesn't
section are we talking about, Jim?
this
Next
is
page.
the next page, this one right here.
Okay, sorry.
The statute really doesn't define the universe of what action is. It gives 3 actions that the commission can take, but it doesn't say those are the only actions it can take. And so this regulation pursuant to our broad authority under section 4 says that in addition to the 3 statutory actions, the highlighted in red actions and other actions that we can take. There may be others that we think about later on, but this too adds an element of flexibility to our arsenal at the moment.
Yeah, I think this is great, yeah, really. And among other things, we're trying to give the applicants a heads up as to the range of options out there.
Right.
Any other questions?
Anybody else? So do we need a vote, I guess, on this? Yes, guess we do, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Commissioner, you want to do it again?
Sure. Then and we're adopting these as on an emergency basis to be effective
As
immediately.
amended by
Yep. So I would move that the commission enacts the regulations presented, as presented here relative to licensing fees and actions as amended herein today.
On an emergency basis.
Thank you, on an emergency basis.
Second?
Second.
That's inclusive of the 2 changes that the commission discussed to
Yes.
add fiscal 2015.
Right,
That's correct.
And it pertains to 121 and to 118.
right.
Did you make a change in 118?
Well, the changes in the book.
Or changes in the book? Yeah. Right, okay. Second, we got a second? Are there any further discussion, clarifications, anything? All in favor of the motion as offered, signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you, Commissioners. That would be very helpful to get our financial team to work.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that brings me to the next item in your agenda, which is the gambling credit discussion. Behind tab 3D, there are 2 letters which raise concerns about gaming credit. And if I might just share a couple of points with you as the commission gets into the discussion. At this point, the commission is scheduled to begin taking a look at a draft of credit and check acceptance regulations as part of our internal control regulations, and will be our schedule, and I'll talk about that total schedule later, will be to begin about April 17th. In addition, the Gambling Act itself, in Section 27, does provide for credit. That credit, of course, is limited by whatever regulations the commission determines. I wanted to also, Mark Van der Linden couldn't be with us today, our problem gambling director, but he did leave some information that I wanted to share with the commission to also put this in perspective. On March 6th, he intends to present a report on responsible gaming framework. As part of that package, part of that package includes strategies, and one of those strategies will be to reduce financial risk, and that provides some specific parameters on house credit. However, containing house credit is just one way to reduce financial risk to patrons. There are also a series of steps that we can take to accomplish that and support that effort as well. Let me just hit a few of those. I won't go through this. It's fairly lengthy, but I can comment further if the commission wants me to. The banning of house credit in Mark's strategy, this is a draft, is a responsible best practice for gaming. Those licensees choosing to offer house credit shall utilize the following guidelines, and this comes from his strategy. The commission has not adopted this, but will be presented to the commission on March 6th. House credit will only be extended to qualified patrons. Credit instrument to be defined. The granting of house credit is limited to $500 a day for qualified patrons. A maximum of $1,500 may be extended to qualified patrons at a Massachusetts licensed gaming facility. Patrons are permitted to deposit cash reserves that can be accessed, and allow patrons to place limits on themselves voluntarily on the credit suspension list if they are also requesting that. This also would propose regulations on where ATMs are placed, so they're a certain distance away from the gaming floor itself. A lot of these concepts have to do just to put time and distance between when players have to get more money or make decisions to use what they have won. Check acceptance is another particular area that could often be used as credit, so there'll be restrictions on when those are deposited and when they're received, which helps as well. For instance, it must be currently dated, not post-dated. Must be drawn from your personal account. Could put a limit on personal checks. Patrons may not cash checks for more than $500 a day. Credit cards also come into play with this type of restrictions on financial transactions. He did also leave a couple notes, made references to a text that was written by Robert Williams and restricting access to money. Just a couple notes in there. Mr. Williams noted that in the United States, house credit is a common practice in gambling, so we're talking about something that does take place in gambling establishments. Contrast to that, in Europe, house credit is generally banned, so there's a different...
Is what?
Banned. So there's a different perspective. Also in the States, there's a wide range of gambling credit regulations or restrictions, range all the way from state law that doesn't allow collection of a gambling debt, all the way through, of course, the more liberal processes that we've seen in some of the more significant gaming states. I might just note as well that Section 27 of our Gaming Act does say a gaming licensee may issue credit to a patron of a gaming establishment in accordance with regulations promulgated by the Commission. And then there's a series of different restrictions in the law itself. And I think as well, in response to the letters a little bit, Catherine, you have a couple thoughts on credit?
Under our statute, we have a great deal of leeway in terms of our regulations regarding granting credit. We have a little bit less in terms of how those debts are collected, but we will certainly look at that and try to cover that appropriately in regulations as well. We also will discuss this with the AG. They have offered to discuss this with us as they've done consumer protection regulations on similar matters, so we'll avail ourselves of their thoughts. And we will always get public comment as well, which I'm sure we'll get a great deal of robust public comment on this. So I think we'll be able to develop a good, strong set of regulations that address the issues that both letters raise.
Great. comment. I think it was important that we talk about this for several reasons. This obviously was triggered by the newspaper article that talked about collection practices, and we all know not to necessarily take such an article simply at face value, but it raises important issues. But it was important that the public know that this was on our radar screen long before the article, and something we're paying close attention to in a variety of ways, and that we're in the process of collecting best practices and doing research about what works, what doesn't. We're not here to comment now on Director Van der Linden's framework. We'll do that when the time comes. But I had one other reason why I thought it was important to put this on the agenda, and is there any role? We're now in the evaluation process of, well, for that matter, both Category 1 and 2 slots applicants. Is there any role for us in the evaluation process to assess what our applicants now use as standards? And the second question is, if so, how should we do that? But what do you think about that? Is that something we want to know about as we're making decisions on who we want to license in Massachusetts?
Well, certainly for the Category 1s,
Right.
there is time to do that. But it seems to me that the regulations we're talking about are going to apply to everybody, regardless of what their current practices are. And our best line of attack on the problems that house credit creates is a thoughtful, comprehensive set of regulations that will apply to the slots as well, slots licensee as well as the casino licensees. That's not a direct answer to your question.
Well,
Well,
go ahead.
sorry, I agree with that. I was thinking of if we got too granular in the evaluation piece, we would have to take into context the practices and the regulations of other jurisdictions. So practices by themselves could not be, in my opinion, would be difficult to assess of an applicant because other jurisdictions may have, as Director Day just stated, different regulations and other a combination of how different regulations interact with each other, not just credit, but also collection. So I think there's a parallel to something that has been in the finance section, but it's rather broad and it's more on the operations side. It's not necessarily on this one particular topic. I ultimately agree that with Commissioner McHugh that we have a much better mandate from the statute and tool with our regulations to affect this type of topic.
Mr. Stebbins?
I would agree.
Yeah. Well, I definitely agree that the most critical line of defense is our own regs, and we will think those through carefully, and we'll make sure that our licensees go by standards that we think are appropriate for our jurisdiction. We've also established the principle that just because other jurisdictions have laws which are different from ours or standards which are different from ours, we don't accept those at face value, that we hold our applicants accountable for certain performance standards independent of the rules in jurisdictions. And I don't, this is not a rhetorical question, it's really an open-ended question. I don't have an answer clearly in my mind, but is this something, we have made any number of efforts to try to discern sort of the character and value system of our bidders, and is the whole suitability process was, as Director Wells says, we don't want just to regulate, we want to trust. We want to know that we've got people that are ascribing to the value structure that we're trying to establish. So is there any substantive value on this topic, which is a particularly incendiary, sort of high visibility topic? Is there any value to us to know how our bidders presently behave prior to us imposing our own standards on them.
Mr. Chair, there are many questions in the mitigation section which deal with responsible gaming, and that I have been looking at and evaluating, and we'll talk more about that next week. So it touches on some of these issues, and certainly all of our applicants have said that they will willingly comply with our regulations. So we are touching on this issue when it comes to mitigation and looking at their practices elsewhere.
Does this come up at all specifically, this issue, that how do you extend credit?
Well,
what kind of checks do you do on credit worthiness?
It's not a direct question,
Yeah.
but there are some of the responses that touch on this issue. But there is not a direct question that talks about credit.
It also seems to me that this inquiry is undoubtedly doable, but it's really has to take into account a lot of factors, and I'm not sure what the yield would be from an investigation of those factors. For example, suppose we found that some applicant actually put liens on houses in order to collect debts. And suppose one applicant did it, but only did it when they concluded that very wealthy people were intentionally not paying debts and were using this as a perfectly legitimate means of coercing payment from somebody who could afford to pay and just was choosing not to. You have to go into a lot of analysis in order to come up with that conclusion, rather than simply stopping at the fact that the person's putting liens on houses. On the other hand, somebody is putting liens on houses of people who they've overly extended credit to and should have known weren't going to be able to pay. That's a different kind of person, kind of entity. So it seems to me that the effort that would be required to do a fair assessment of everybody's credit practices and collection practices elsewhere might not yield sufficient information to justify the energy that goes into doing that. And instead, we should rely on creating some regs of our own that would prohibit the practices we find undesirable. But I just don't see how, to sum up, we could do this fairly without being highly granular and labor-intensive, and then come up with some generalizations.
I kind of lean towards what you're saying, but let me just say one other thing. I don't think the issue is whether you put liens on houses. The issue is what kind of standards do you as a corporate entity use for assessing creditworthiness?
Yeah,
How seriously do you take this? Is this just a game in order that you can suck people in? Or are you really serious about trying to make sure that people have credit limits which are appropriate for their means? And that is a really critical, essential principle that we certainly will want to establish. And in one respect, it'd be nice to know in advance, whether people took this seriously or not. But having said all that, I don't know that I disagree in the bottom line. I think it raises the sensitivity with which we want to address the issues in our own regs and make sure that we have the tools in our own regs to understand that there's a long continuum about the degree of responsibility you exercise in assessing creditworthiness. And we want to be pretty far along on that continuum in our standards. And maybe it's enough to leave it at that. But I do think that it's really an important thing for us to, A, wrestle with, and B, make sure the public knows that we're paying close attention to this issue.
Yeah, I fully agree with all of that.
And maybe the banking and mortgage industry can take a page from that.
Yeah, good point. Right. Would that we had the authority, right?
If we had the authority, we would also impose on them.
Right. Who knows
the whole world?
Who knows what's next? Right. Okay. Well, I'm fine with that. So this is great, and I think we'll spend more time talking about it when we see the draft regs coming up. Great. Thank you. And you did mention about talking with the Attorney General who offered her services, and I think that's appropriate. Also, our own consultants, Michael and Carol in particular, you know, are knowledgeable about this stuff, and I think, given their backgrounds, have a perspective that would be sympathetic to where the kind of standards we would want, so they might be helpful too, if you haven't already spoken to them.
And to your prior point, Mr. Chairman, this I went back to look at the strategic plan, which I hadn't done in a little while, and you know, there's a good broad section there. So you know, we've been thinking about this for some time now, actually, from very early on, and
Good point.
we're continuing to do so.
Great. Okay, anything else on that?
That's all.
All right,
That's all we have.
next item.
The last item I have for you today is a regulation development schedule. And it's under tab 3. We included the document entitled a Regulation Development Checklist and a chart depicting a consolidated and planned schedule for regulation drafting, consideration, and addition. With all that said, it's an attempt to get our regulation development under one roof, so to speak, get the entire group where we can see it and see how what kind of progress we're making. And I did commit an error even in mine. I forgot to put a large copy in my pamphlet, and probably did the same with you. So it's going to take a little bit extra effort to read what's actually on that. So let me summarize what we have. First of all, the checklist that you have, which looks like this regulation checklist. The bold type in the checklist represents the statutory direction. So this is everything that really the legislature directed the commission to enact some regulations about. It doesn't limit the commission to that. Actually, it allows the commission much more authority than those that's required. And then the other section is the chart itself. And in the upper right-hand corner of that chart, you will see a regulation promulgation period. And what that is designed to, and it's right up here on this chart, right up in the right-hand corner, it's in yellow. And what that is designed to do, and it guesstimates a period of about 70 days, it's designed to go through briefly what the standard and required process is for rule development. And I think if we're in a perfect world, we might be able to do that in 56 days, or maybe a little less. But we're using as a standard kind of 70 days because that takes into consideration holidays, weekends, and those kind of things to give us a little bit more time. So at this point, what we've done in this regulation area and in the checklist, we've identified 3 different topic areas. This isn't an attempt to provide a list of every individual regulation that will be in those topic areas, but is a concept to make sure that we can address those topic areas as we move through in a reasonably timely fashion. So there's 33 total areas. This is not an exhaustive list as we've discussed. We've completed 8 licensing topics at this point, which is our most significant effort here as of late. The Commission had already completed the requirements with phase 1 and the application screening and deliberation process. So up in the right-hand corner, this kind of reflects on this chart the time and those areas that we have already completed relative to licensing. From there, we've also went, as you move forward, on the left-hand side, you'll see we started listing categories, so we can actually take a look to see if we've addressed each one of these. For instance, we've got about 11 categories total, and we start with the assessment regulations, what the Commission has been considering for some time at this point. On the next page, we've got problem gambling. And those categories are listed right over here on the far left of the chart. We're trying to provide a little grouping. We've got problem gambling, monitoring regs, which are looking at initial drafts today, training, alcohol beverage control, which you are also seeing an initial draft today, slot approval, which is a short way of saying a real long, or a little significant area in regulation, but it's a little bit easier to talk about as we move forward. Responsible gaming we'll have coming forward, financial, internal controls as we've talked, which inclusive of our credit discussion, and then surveillance, and then general area, and we're leaving to last at this point, junkets, interim transfers, and table games. A lot of the reason is obviously table games are the jurisdiction of casinos, and we don't see that happening opening until at least 2 years. We'll have that well before 2 years, but there's no sense in trying to do all that at the same time. So we're trying to spread out these regulation tasks, essentially, as far as we can in the year, without trying to do too much at one time. Now, with that said, what ends up happening is if you look down the right down the middle of the chart, you'll see that we're timing, and we anticipate probably early September to be through the major categories of the regulations that we need, in particular to support the slot parlors. So that gives you an idea of the number of regulations, the different hearings, and these come before the commission. The commission has established really a little bit of a expanded process. At this point, we draft regulations, review them, assemble those, we get a draft into the commission takes a look at them. Oftentimes we'll offer suggestions. We then put those out for public comment informally. We contact stakeholders, we work on that draft, and then we bring that draft back to the commission, essentially as the final draft for authorization to move forward the formal process. At that point, if the commission authorizes to do that, then we actually begin that formal 70-day process that I was talking about, which includes a formal public process and, of course, the hearing about the regulations themselves. So I didn't want to spend too long on this, but I did want to make sure the commission is aware. We've got all these in the sites. You'll be seeing them coming forward. They will be coming fairly regular here as we get through the spring and early summer. So you may have seen enough regulations by the time you get to September to last quite some time. But that gives you at least a little bit of the plan as we move forward. Probably the largest section, we already talked briefly about responsible gaming framework. What that idea is, Mark will go through a bunch of policy areas, and then from there, we'll develop regulations to bring back to the commission. I think it's later in the month. You should also see on March 6th, we're really looking forward to the slot standards, electronic gaming standards, so we can work to get those in place by around July. And that's to provide for the ability for our licensees to be able to order that equipment. And with that, we're also going to be starting to license the gaming vendors. So that all fits together. Got licensed gaming vendors, approved equipment, ability to order, so we can open up the slot parlors hopefully by the end of the year, early next year.
Yeah, we're turning into a very efficient regulation promulgation machine, which is great. There's a lot of work that goes in here, and it's good to have as thoughtful plan as you have laid out. At one point, our consultants had suggested a placeholder for internet gaming regulations. And I know that we can always get to that if the landscape changes. But have we not decided to focus on those because of priorities? Is that perhaps
Commissioner
the
Zuniga,
simplest?
we haven't added that to this list formally at this point, and part of the reason is the really at this point we don't have any statutory authority really that describes it, but the Internet Gaming Forum is actually a beginning, because that's going to help us actually explore the facts around Internet gaming, what are the possibilities and how they look, but at least before we could actually move forward with regulations, we'd have to have some additional statutory authority, at least I believe.
Yes. We do. But anyway, just wanted to mention that.
And it's not, at this point, who knows whether we'll get that statutory authority?
Yes.
I mean, so. I thought that this was, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I thought that this chart was really helpful to everybody, laying out the regs as it does, and then the events that have to be taken into account in order to have the regs completed. So I thought it's really very helpful. I'm uncertain though as to, if we go back to the listing.
Checklist?
Yes, the checklist, what those dates in the far left-hand column are.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner McHugh. That's when we plan a draft to be presented before the commission.
All right, I see. So those dates correspond to dates on this chart?
Yes, you'll see it's in the yellow. There's
Those yellow arrows?
the yellow arrows down, yes.
I see. Okay. So that's the first draft to the commission, is
Right.
that date?
And that's sort of keys our work, when we actually have to have something produced, so we decided, we debated, and went with the first draft as the way to actually decide when we're starting the project.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
And as we go through the assignments to all staff, these get closer, we start putting them in, so we're actually looking a little bit closer as we get in about a month and a half on.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I agree. This is great work, and as you know, it gives me a great sense of comfort to know that somebody's on top of this, so you can spend as much time talking with this chart as you want.
I've got many other charts that I'll bring back.
Good, great. We are increasingly or frequently into areas where we have very little in-house domain knowledge. And we have some, you and Director Acosta, but not much. And I just wonder what's the process by which we compile the original drafts of some of these things? I mean, internal controls is a classic, about which we know next to nothing.
Well,
What?
I take exception to that one.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Do you know something about it?
Joe, sure.
Oh, good, all right, good. All right, so you start with Enrique's draft, good. But where do you go to get the initial sort of baseline best practice for things like that?
I would say there's kind of two primary ways we're doing it at this point, and Catherine can add to that as we, essentially we've sat down and we take a look at what we're moving forward with, and then we do request consultant assistance. But primarily what we're looking at, though, is asking our consultants that we've assigned to those particular regulation areas to bring together a package of what best practices is overused, but essentially representative examples from other states. And particularly as we get into these areas, there are a lot of good examples, a lot of good regulations.
Right.
So I think for the most part, we don't have to invent a lot of new things, but we have to look to see whether that's what works in Massachusetts, and then as we bring them forward, draft them and add to it so we have a product that works here in Massachusetts. But we also, staff will reach out and assemble that information as well. So Artem, for instance, is assisting John Glennon in doing that research and bringing that package together for the electronic side. So it's kind of those two combinations
Great,
between
okay.
Consultants and staff to bring together that package originally, and then move that package initially before the commission.
Consultant, staff, and Commissioner Zuniga.
Yes.
I should mention, because it's not irrelevant. Internal controls, we abide by a lot of internal controls here. Our CFAO is perhaps the best, the head of how we guard our assets and pay our bills and have dual responsibilities and things like that. So the finance department deals on a day-to-day basis a lot with internal controls, including the staff that reports to Derek. It ultimately is also part of the executive director's responsibilities and duties. So there are nuances to how internal controls apply to gaming, and that's important to understand and rely on consultants. But it's not something that's entirely new. It's not something that's going to rest with me either. It ultimately rests with everybody here at this table. But it's just one example that I think there's a lot of jurisdictions, as you mentioned, a lot of examples. There's a range. We could be very prescriptive, or we could be very risk-based. Or in other words, the approach may vary, and that's a decision that we have to make as we draft these. And these are not irrelevant decisions. These are important decisions. But there is a lot, in my opinion, of know-how and capability to draft a lot of these and ultimately decide on these regulations.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that I know, we're talking about surveillance, security, enforcement issues, and I know the state police has been attending training sessions and really reaching out to their colleagues in other jurisdictions to find those best practices. And you know, I've had several conversations with them about their education and how hard they're working to learn this business. So I think there are many, many efforts going on to make sure we will be, I know best practices is overused, but there are best practices, and we are learning what they are.
And we do use sort of a team approach as we move these packets along. It's not just one individual. So state police, for instance, will be part of the process of drafting the initial regulations that come to the commission on surveillance. That's just one topic, but there's several others.
Right. Great, that's good. Good, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I don't have any other questions, that brings me to item 4 of the legal division with Catherine.
So the first thing on our section this morning is the draft license award with conditions. And about a month ago, we brought a draft license to the commission. We talked about separating that into 2 parts, and we talked about the necessity of a short form for the licensee to have on the premises. And we also talked about putting it out for comments to our various constituencies. So what you see in your package today, the first is a draft short form license. This was created by one of our consultants, Michael and Carol, with our input. I have no doubt our communications folks can make it look a lot better than it currently looks in your package. But this is the prototype for the award, the license form that a licensee would have on the premises to show that they have been appropriately licensed by the commission. The balance of the license, the draft license form, we did email particularly to all of our applicants. We had it posted on our website. We got comments from some of the applicants, from our consultants, and from municipality. There is in your package a list of the comments that we received, and we also got 2 additional sets of comments after we prepared the package that we're going to review as well. I think the comments can best be described as folks maintaining that the form that we provided was too long, that we should not include all of the statutory conditions specifically in the form, that we could get away with just referencing them and that would be fine. Certain comments addressed some permitting issues that I actually thought were helpful, and that we can make some of the permitting requirements and the commission's monitoring of permitting requirements as they go forward a little more specific, so I think that would be good. The bottom line is that I think what we need is a form that is a more decisional form, probably has less verbiage from the statute. So what I would propose to the commission is that the legal department draft a form that's more in conformance with that kind of a structure, that we get it to you next week so you can see it as you start your deliberations. And then we move forward with a form that is basically in 2 pieces. One is a short form license that the licensee has. The second is a more decisional format that it'll have all of the applicants that you considered for a particular license. It'll have the findings that you make on each applicant. It'll allow a comparison between the applicants, and it'll show why the final award was made, and it'll have a lot more detail, and then it will have specific provisions for that applicant, things like the debt equity ratio, things like specific permitting requirements, and any unique conditions that the commission requires for that applicant.
I had a thought or a question. The way the short form is written here could allow, but it may be good for us to highlight that there's 2 milestones here that are very important. One's when we award the license, and one's when the term begins, because they open operations. The 5-year or the 15-year term begins. And those are separated by the amount of time that it takes to permit, design, and construct the facility. So whether we have a temporary license or it's one of the conditions and it gets refreshed with a 15 or 5-year term upon the vote to allow them to begin gaming operations, maybe just something to consider.
I think that's a discussion that the commission would want to have.
I didn't quite follow the distinction. So this form is pretty close to done, you're saying? You were
Yes.
talking about, now what is the second document that you're referring to?
The second form would be what we call a decisional award. It would look much like our suitability decisions, and so it would compare each of the applicants. For example, in the category 2s, it would address each of the 3 applicants that you considered. It would discuss the findings that were made based upon each commissioner's report, and then it would explain why the successful applicant was picked. It's
Okay, but
modeled on the
That's not a
Pennsylvania form.
license. That's got nothing to do with the license. That's just that's a decision analysis or a decision document or whatever, in fact, the law calls for us, right, to have some kind of a document which describes our decision-making process.
It does only for the unsuccessful applicants. We've talked about doing it for everyone and making it comparative. It is a decision, but it also functions as the final award at the end of that document. And one of the examples that we've looked at is the award that Pennsylvania issues. So what it is it sums up all the considerations, and at the end of that document, it says the award is made based upon, the discussion in this document. So it functions a little bit as both. It's decisional as well as an award.
And it also contains in that award a list of the conditions that the successful applicant has to follow, right? So they're not,
So is that the document here, the order of commission granting the license? Is that what you're describing?
Yes. That would be part of it, yes. It would be, this part would be the short form, but then this would incorporate the conditions that were in that longer decisional award, yes. So we would reference that date of award and that award decision in the short form.
Okay, I'm sure you've got this straight, but just make sure. So there's this, which is sort of the simple license.
Yes.
There's this decision structure, decision analysis leading to a determination of an award. The detailed license, which has the conditions of the license in it, where does that,
That will be in the decisional award.
that'll be in the
It'll be
decision
part of
award?
that, yes.
The second document.
It'll be
So
all
that-
one document.
So that is a legal agreement between us and the winner, in effect.
well, it's not it's a one-way
Yeah, it's a
agreement.
Yeah, it's one
agreement.
way.
Yeah, all right,
I mean, it's an order. You get the license
Yeah.
on these conditions.
okay. I guess it seems a little bit funny to me to go through the process, to have a document which describes the analytic process, which is the same document as the license agreement with its conditions. I don't quite logically see why those two things go together, but I'm not sure it makes any difference.
Well, just in a form, if you think about it, and there's a lot of things that take that form. You list a whole series of factors that you considered. Then you get to in light of the foregoing section, we hereby award the license to X on the following conditions. And these conditions are hereby incorporated into the license issued on even date. And so formally, you tie the two together, and you've got something that isn't 60 pages long that they have to plaster one wall with in order to operate their business.
Fine, I mean, it's weird to me, but that's fine.
Where we,
Why wouldn't we just have a document that describes our decision-making process, at the bottom of which we say, and based on this, we decided to award it to X. Then there's a second document, which is the award to X, which says, subject to the following conditions, you win. And here are the conditions. And I don't, I'm just,
So now
Three
we've got 3
documents.
documents instead of 2.
right.
And then some lawyer is going to say, there's a conflict between the 2 documents. You gave us an unconditional thing here, and this isn't really. It's just,
Fine, all right. I give up.
are we talking about some of these requests next for permission changes to the form of the license?
They were actually in section 3.
Some of those requests are requests that raise concerns about requirements that are in our statute. And our statute is our statute. So those, we can certainly discuss those comments.
I have a couple.
But as we stand now, we comply with those. Those will be conditions because they're raised in the statute. But we can certainly discuss the comments from applicants on them.
Well, I did have one particular, one of these comments we already talked about early on, actually. I remember this because I drafted the position paper when we were doing the policy decisions. And it relates to the debt-to-equity ratio. As written in the statute, the Commission determines the debt-to-equity ratio. And I remember from our position, however we incorporate in regulations or not, I wanted us to look at not just that one ratio, but other ratios, kind of like New Jersey does. There's a 5-test procedure. They look at the current ratio, the ability to pay bills, and ultimately the Commission can require an increase in the equity position or et cetera, so that it's an ongoing monitoring process rather than one time, once at some point in time. So it just sort of struck me as, maybe at least one of our applicants doesn't know that we have taken a much broader position relative to this particular issue, which we could probably make him aware.
And I think that's correct. As we listed conditions in that original document, we took straight from the statute, so that we only took the one that was listed. But we can describe that and flesh that out more in the specific conditions section of the award, and we can address those.
What about the comments? What about the comments that are not statutory? Take the comments on the first page of the summary, dealing with paragraph 12, or paragraph 7 and 8. I mean, what's our plan for figuring out what to do about those?
Well, paragraph 12 is something that we've started to address in the next set of regulations that you're going to look at today, which is the pre-construction monitoring. And so we can address that in regulations. Paragraph 7 and 8.
But they're talking about, and I don't have it in front of me, they're apparently talking about the term, the wording, the verbiage, the content of paragraph 12. And I just use that as an example. There are some non-statutory comments in here. And the question is, what are we going to do about those?
We are going to review them against what their concern is and see if we can address it. Whether we've addressed it already in some form of regulation, whether we can address it in the award itself, whether it needs to be a specific condition to a licensee. Some of them may be unique to what they see as their concerns, but we will address all of their comments and see if we can get them into the decision.
And then we'll have a chance to talk about them, right? Knowing that if you still stick with the bi-weekly reporting and the bidder suggests it ought to be more infrequent than that, then we'll have a chance to talk about it when the draft regs come before us, right?
And by the way, not every.
Just a minute before we leave that, but these are license conditions, so we're going to. These are part of that document that's going to accompany the award of the license. So we're talking about next Friday.
Well, I don't think everything has to be either a condition or a regulation. There is, the condition or the regulation could read something like, provide reports to the Commission as they determine appropriate, or as the executive director or the staff determine to be appropriate. We don't have to be, prescribing whether it's bi-weekly or every 6 months and put that in regs or otherwise.
I fully agree with that, and that's a way of addressing this comment. But
Yes.
the question is, when and how are we going to address all of these comments between now and conceivably next Friday?
Well, yes, that was part of my question initially, whether we were going to get through this, which we are now, but.
Well, I think for a number of these comments, as I've reviewed them, they are based upon the specific conditions we took out of the statute. So I think one of the ways we're going to address some of these is we're going to put in a general compliance with 23K and with our regulations.
Right.
Now, for more specific comments, we will look at to see what we have in the regulation pipeline. They might be addressed there. We may want to address them as you proposed, as required by the Commission to be determined at some point. Some of them may be specific enough that you may want to address them with a specific licensee, depending on the award. So we will look at all of these comments, but the comments that they've made here predominantly are based upon statutory requirements, because that's how we set up the form that they looked at.
Okay, I mean, I understand that, and it's the non-statutory requirements that,
And your point is, on Friday, we're gonna make a decision, right? So
Right.
a document that's gonna have all these conditions in it needs to be done that day, right, or day or two thereafter?
We talked last time about drafting this document after the commission made a decision. So we were going to look at the findings and then draft the decisional document after that.
So just walk me through the process. If, let's, and for the moment, let's just stick with the slots, because that's easier. We make the award decision on Friday. That triggers the 30 days. That's the award decision that we're making on Friday, is that correct?
If you make that decision, yes.
If we do make, that's the plan at the moment, is to make that decision. What then happens in terms of this decision document / license, which includes conditions, which include those commented on here? How does that get drafted and executed?
So we were going to talk specific conditions first with the proposed licensee, in case there were conditions that they had to agree on. If the commission wanted specific conditions based upon that application, there was going to be some time for the licensee to review those and determine whether they could agree to them or not. While that process is going on, this document will be drafted. It will have statutory conditions. We will look at these other conditions. I don't think there are a lot of non-statutory conditions, but we will go through them very carefully. And we will have the specific conditions incorporated into that document for the commission to review. And then we'll pass that by the licensee, and the licensee will agree or raise other comments or concerns with us.
And just so, meanwhile, the 30-day clock is ticking. They object to some of the conditions. There's a negotiation on some of the conditions. How do those get resolved and handled?
The commission would review those. Commission would,
Right.
yes, would review them, and if the commission approves them, we would incorporate them into the document.
Or not,
Or
right?
not.
and all of this is going on while the 30-day clock is ticking? I thought our timeline called for this to be done in the 24 hours between the time when we made a tentative award and, or indicated where we were gonna go and the time we actually made the decision. Maybe I misread something.
No, from the process the commission adopted, I think the plan was the reports. There would be a period of time, that's what we indicated on the process document, that if there are specific conditions with the applicant, that would be there'd be allowed time for staff to review that with the applicant, that basically at the end of the process, the applicant would come back to an acceptance or not an acceptance of the conditions. That would occur before Friday. That's what the schedule is at this point. And then, if I understand correctly, after that process, Catherine was talking about the development of the decisional format, which is basically just the document the commissioners sign in the end to record those decisions.
Right. So, but the decisional process, the conditions are a scrivener's process to reduce to writing the things that have already been agreed on by the time we make the decision as to who's going to get the license.
Correct. That's what my understanding is, and that's what's noted in the process that supports the agenda for next week.
That's what my understanding was as well.
So to go back, so Tuesday, Wednesday, we get the reports. Maybe we make the sort of tacit decision by Wednesday evening if we got lucky. That gives, and then I guess as part of that, we will discuss what conditions would be required. And that would probably be some kind of an iterative process. Maybe on Thursday, by that time, we have the tacit winner at the table and are talking with them about what we.
Staff is.
Staff is, okay. Right, about those conditions. There's back and forth. The commission is having a meeting, an open meeting that day, so we can be involved in the back and forth. And theoretically, within that more or less 24-hour period, the conditions get agreed to by both parties, and the formal award then is announced on Friday, and that triggers the 30 days.
Whatever the award is.
Right, right,
Right.
right. And in
Whatever form.
right, okay. And if it takes longer, if it takes us longer to decide who the winner is, that could bump things, but such is life. And in the case, luckily, in the slots parlor, we've got plenty of time, so that could happen. Okay, but the key thing that I think we're now getting settled with Commissioner McHugh, at least, and I, are the big document, the decision document you're talking about, is really just a reportage. There's no negotiations, or very little negotiation, except for the conditions section. And the conditions section of that is designed to be handled pretty quickly post tacit decision and award, which could be as little as a day.
Ideally in 24 hours.
Yeah, right.
Yes, and the agreement to those conditions would take place before the award.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so it is just merely taking the information from the process and put it into the decisional format.
Right. Makes sense? Okay, that's helpful.
So, we were just talking, it sounds simple.
Yeah, no, no, it doesn't.
Well, there's a lot compressed into that, maybe a lot compressed into that 24 hours, maybe not.
Yeah,
Maybe not.
Maybe there's not a lot of, maybe a lot of conditions aren't a problem.
Right.
Probably need to hire some additional lawyer drafters to start working on that decision document. You don't want to start that Wednesday night.
No.
Cancel the dinner plans on Wednesday night.
Yeah, right. Okay, so far so good. What's next?
So the next item in your package is the monitoring and pre-opening regulations. These regulations were drafted under the same process that Executive Director Day has explained. What we did is we went to our consultants, in this case outside counsel, suggested to them particular best practices and asked them to review other jurisdictions. And then in combination with that review and with our statute, we came up with this set of proposed regs. We also got a lot of good staff input in terms of additions to make to this regulation. So this is the very, very first draft. It will need to go out, obviously, for some informal comment as well as formal public comment, but it is our first foray into pre-construction and monitoring regs. You will notice there are some timeframes in there that we need to think about, and there may be other things that the Commission would like to add in terms of how it wants to see pre-construction monitoring done.
Anybody?
Well, I had one, I had a couple of comments, and I know they're only presented as a first draft, but I think one that's broad and important to me, we could talk about today. When we mention schedule, I think it should apply to schedule, budget, and specifications, plans, and drawings collectively. This comes from a recommendation from the architects. You may remember the white paper from the AIA and the Boston Society of Architects that highlighted the need for us to effectively do a design review process so that any scope changes potentially happen in between the submittal of different construction drawings can be analyzed by our staff and consultants. So those three documents really always work hand in hand, or they interact with each other. A detailed budget form, a detailed schedule, and the construction plans, specifications, and drawings. Similarly, and I know it is not intended to read as a contract, but we would require access to the premises, space during the construction period, as well as not just for the commission, but for its designee. So there's a couple of places where that could be inserted, But I think it's very important for us to highlight that.
Do we need in your view, the entire set of construction plans? I mean,
That's always very tricky. I think it's, this gets me to another point. All of those documents should be submitted in a form required or prescribed by us. We don't want the 4,000 activity schedule or the full set of drawings necessarily. We may want them at some point, or we may require them, but that's not by default the form that they need to be submitted. But we also don't want the 9 activity milestone schedule, because that could not tell us much about when delays are happening. So
outline of how the shower stalls are done, we don't need that.
we don't, but if that ultimately is the source of, I don't know, a big problem or a big delay, we need the access or the capability to request it. So it's just a little wordsmithing, but the larger picture is, we need these 3 sets of documents in the form that's prescribed by us, and we may require them from time to time. What we really need is access to those, and we need our agents to also have that access.
What is the sense of when these will be ready to go relative to when the slots winner licensee will need to be overseen by them?
I'd have to look at my schedule to give you an exact date, but we're anticipating we need to have these basically in the early spring of this year. One of the holdups I want to be sure we try to get is when we select our contractor for the monitoring. I do want to have them take a look at these regs and provide their input as well, so we've got that down. So we were looking at this as a initial draft, and then we're talking about probably about 2 weeks before we can get it back before the commission, and that would be a request to start the formal process, which would be about a 70-day adoption period.
Okay, because, it could be that everything we've heard about, actually all of the slots applicants have talked about moving at Mach speed. So I think there's a substantial likelihood that these will certainly not be formally adopted. They may not even be done by the time they're starting to give us, for example, construction schedules. So I'm sure we can deal with that somehow or other. But it's just something to be mindful of, because this process is going to need to be regulated prior to the regulations being in place, I think.
Correct. And we always, and part of what we're trying to do with all these regulations is get, with the initial drafts, to a point where we could adopt them by emergency regulations if we were in that position.
Right.
But I think because we should be in a process where these monetary regulations are pretty much final, that I think we'll probably be in good shape.
Yeah. Okay, good. Next.
And then lastly, in your package, you have the draft alcohol beverage licensing and distribution regulations. These, again, are in very first draft. We have not yet shared them with the Alcohol Beverage Control Commission, but we will, because we would like their comments. We modeled these predominantly on the process that was used by Massport. Massport being a fairly similar facility where you have an overarching regulator and then various establishments within that, in the premises. So we know we've covered some issues based upon concerns that have arisen out of that sort of construct, but we also know that we will be getting other comments as well. So again, these are just the first, and we'd take any comments from the commissioners, and then we'll put them out for informal public comment as well.
We posted both of these.
I did not get a chance to look at them in detail, but and I will. But Just one quick thought was that when licensees get into arrangements like leasing to national providers, to the Cheesecake Factory or whatever it may be, that all of these apply to all of those lessees as well.
Yes, and that's the structure that we're trying to put
That's the
into
structure
place.
that you have.
Yes, and there would be responsibility on the premises by the licensee, the Cheesecake Factory, for example, as well as responsibility with the licensee who's the casino, runs the casino as well. So that was a very important issue that came up in airports.
Yep.
Do we enforce these, or is the ABCC people who are put on our group, or do we jointly do it? How does that work?
We issue the license. We have the Alcohol Beverage Control Commission Enforcement Unit that reports into us, so they will enforce part of it. I do believe our gaming agents have any part in that?
I believe it's concurrent cooperative jurisdiction, but
Yeah.
it's been a while since.
So the ABCC is an important ingredient in creating these regulations, right?
Yes, that's right.
And how are we working with them to get that staff up and ready as well as that? I saw someplace that was on some schedule.
Correct, that's
down the line.
on one of the schedule we have. We're trying to finish up our agreement with MSP, which we're very close with, and then
Okay.
we're going to move forward with the ABCC
Okay.
agreement similar to that, and the one with the Attorney General's office.
Okay, but the consultation on this set of regs doesn't have to wait for that process.
We will, no, it won't wait for it. Basically, we're going forward with that process as we speak.
Okay.
And we will want them to comment specifically
Yeah.
about these regs as we
Right.
develop that MOU.
Right, okay.
Anything else? Are you done, Director and General Counsel?
That's all I have, yes.
Yes. I'm done.
Okay. Anything else on anybody's agenda?
Yes, I move to adjourn.
Good. Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right. Thank you all.
Made me nervous.
Good job.